Thank you. Welcome everybody to the beekeeping lecture. It's sponsored by Science Club. I'm Bobby, the secretary of Science Club. Woo! Yeah, come on, get excited, get excited! Alright, we're gonna see an amazing lecture today. Al Salopek was kind enough to come over here to Broward College. Please clap for our speaker as well. Yeah! Well, Al Salopek is going to talk to us about bees. They're one of the tiniest organisms that we have on Earth, but they do so many things that propel our environment. They make us honey. They pollinate our flowers so we can eat and live and breathe on this planet. Al Salopek is also the president of the Palm Beach County Beekeepers Association and is part of Bee Understanding, which is an educational program that comes to schools and also educates young kids and adults about bees and what they do on this planet, and also how they're facing many extinctions. They're dying off, and how we kind of started that mess, but how we can also save that as well. So put your hands together and have your ears open for Al Salopek.
Thank you very much. That's hard to follow. I think we all need to just go home, and you'll still get credit because we're going to go on to Twitter and we'll tweet this whole thing, and I'll probably get more interest that way than the way we used to do things in the olden days. I can't believe I'm saying that. But we used to actually get together like this. We didn't have these little devices where we would be like, oh, I got 2 million friends. So we're actually going to do it the hard way. We're going to talk about things instead of tweeting things. I have kids, so I do understand your generation. Again, my name is Al Salopek, and I am a beekeeper, but I'm not your typical beekeeper because I don't take my bees from farm to pollinate crops. I take my bees around to educate children and adults about the importance of the honeybee. And there's a lot of bees out there. There's over 20,000 different types of bees in the world. There's over 3,000 different types of bees right here in Florida. But we're going to concentrate today on the honeybee. How boring of a subject can that be? And I can't believe that I had to come to this thing, right? No, we're actually going to have fun today because I'm not going to stand up here and be like, yes, I'm here to talk about the honeybee. Please wake up. It's not going to be like that. I'm a very energetic person, and I love honeybees. Believe it or not, I used to be in the restaurant business. I've owned 7 restaurants since I was the age of 19. And I retired from the restaurant industry about 6 years ago. And that's when I got into beekeeping. Because my neighbor got bees in the eaves of his house. And he asked me how he could get rid of them. And I said, I don't know, but don't kill them because I hear they're having problems. And he said, what kind of problems are bees having? I said, I don't know. I just heard the bees are having problems. How many people in here have heard that bees are having problems? Raise your hand. There are actually people in here that didn't know that honeybees are having problems? Wow. Okay. So we got a lot of work ahead of us today. Do you know why honeybees are having problems? The people that raise your hands. Well, I thought I knew too, until I started studying the honeybee. And I learned that it's not just one thing that's affecting the honeybee. It's multiple things that are affecting the honeybee. And honeybees, yes, they are dying off. Are they going extinct? I don't know if we can go that far to say that. But where we're having problems is in the commercial industry. We're having issues raising bees commercially, which is different than feral bees. Feral bees are bees that live out in the wild, right? Well, we could talk all day long about wild feral bees and how man is killing them off also, because they are dying, but not at the same rate that bees are dying in the commercial industry. So when I'm talking about bees dying off, I'm talking about bees in the commercial industry. If you're a commercial beekeeper, the problems that you're having raising bees. So I'm a backyard beekeeper, and there's a big insurgence of beekeeping on a hobbyist level, keeping bees in your own backyard. Well, that's all well and good, but it's a lot easier to keep bees in your backyard than it is to be a commercial beekeeper, because you don't have the same stresses being put on those bees that the commercial beekeeper is putting on his bees. Because the honeybee is now man's slave. We've enslaved the honeybee to do work for us that we can't do, and that's pollinate. Pollination occurs when bees or insects go from one flower to another flower and transfer pollen from one flower to another flower. Well, this happens naturally. There are a lot of different pollinators in the world. Wasps pollinate, even birds pollinate. Bats will pollinate, butterflies will pollinate. So there's different pollinators. Why was the honeybee chosen to be man's pollinator? Well, the honeybee was chosen to be man's pollinator because this is where we raise the honeybee. In this box contains 10 frames like this. And this is where the bees will build their honeycomb and live. So they're free to go from the entrance of this hive, and they can forage 3 to 5 miles from this box, and they always come back to this box. Inside this box, we'll have over 30,000 bees in that one box. So it's a nice, small, compact container, and they always come back to that box. They don't fly at night, so every night they're all back inside this box, and we can move that box to wherever we want. The next morning they wake up and say, "Whoa, we're in a new spot." Okay. They reorientate to that new spot, they go out, collect food, and they come back to that spot. Then we can move them again. So it's very convenient for man because it's a small container and the bees keep returning. Could you imagine catching 30,000 butterflies, putting them in the back of a truck, taking them to a farm somewhere, and say, "You're free, go fly and pollinate"? Well, what's going to happen? They're going to go out and they're going to pollinate, but they're not coming back. You got to go out and collect 30,000 more butterflies to take them to the next field. It's very inconvenient for man. So we've enslaved the honeybee to do our work of pollination. Well, why do we need bees to pollinate if we already have pollinators out there? Why do we need honeybees? Well, we need honeybees because of the style of farming that we're doing nowadays. Industrialized farming. High-density farming. What does that mean? High-density farming. High-density farming is where you plant 5 times the amount of crops per acre, and you get 5 times the amount of produce off of that 1 acre. Well, in the olden days, we used to farm, but we used to plant, and let's say the farmer would plant tomatoes. And he'd plant tomatoes on that 1 acre, and let's say, to keep it simple, that he gets 1 bushel of tomatoes per acre by natural pollination. Because the natural pollinators can come and pollinate those plants to give him 1 bushel of tomatoes. Well, let's say that he plants 5 times the amount of tomatoes per acre on his farm. And to his surprise, he still only gets 1 bushel of tomatoes, even though he planted 5 times the amount of tomato plants. That's because natural pollination could only pollinate enough flowers to give him 1 bushel of tomatoes. And again, I'm keeping this very simple. So he says, well, I need 5 bushels of tomatoes. I had 5 times the amount of plants. Why didn't I get 5 times the amount of produce? Because he needs to bring in 5 times the amount of pollinators to pollinate all those flowers. So he goes to the honeybee, and he trucks in honeybees, and now he gets 5 bushels of tomatoes, because now he has 5 times the amount of pollinators in that concentrated area to take care of all those flowers, to give him pollination on every flower, to give him tomatoes. Again, that's very simplified, but you get the picture. So, industrialized farming. We can feed the world using less property. Because man is this invasive species that is taking over the world. And we're paving everything. We're putting buildings up. We're putting parks in. We're putting sidewalks in. We're putting roads in. Houses in. Well, guess what? There's no land left for farms. Yet we still have to feed everybody. So let's feed everybody by growing more on that acre of land that's left. You following along? What's happening? So now we're industrializing farming. Well, to get those plants pollinated, we need to industrialize pollination. And so that's why we enslaved the honeybee. And now the honeybee travels all around America pollinating the foods that we eat. 30% of the food that we eat is pollinated by the honeybee. So you think, 30%. Well, we got 70% food left, right? So we're not going to die. Well, if we don't die, it's going to be a very boring diet. How many people in here like chocolate? Yeah? Well, we probably wouldn't have chocolate if we didn't have the honeybee, because the honeybee pollinates the cocoa plant. The cocoa flour turns into a cocoa bean. We grind it up, mix it with sugar and milk, and it turns into chocolate. This shirt is made out of cotton. I wouldn't be wearing this shirt if we didn't have the honeybee, because the honeybee pollinates the cotton plant, which gives us a cotton ball, which we harvest to give me this shirt. How many people like hamburgers? Do you think we would have hamburgers if we didn't have the honeybee? Because you know that bees pollinate cows, right? You never saw that? It's a sight to see. No, they don't pollinate directly cattle, but they pollinate clover and alfalfa. And this is what we feed cattle in the cattle industry, is alfalfa and clover. If we didn't have honeybees, we wouldn't be pollinating alfalfa and clover to create an alfalfa or clover seed to regrow alfalfa and clover to feed to our cattle. So we wouldn't have milk, we wouldn't have ice cream, chocolate, we wouldn't have cheese, and we wouldn't have hamburgers. So the next time you're eating that hamburger and it's nice and greasy, thank the honeybee, because they're responsible. So now you get an idea of why the honeybee is important, and we can't go back to the old style of farming because there just isn't enough property available. So we need to move forward with industrialized farming practices, but we need to bring up to speed the beekeeping industry, because we've changed farming, but we haven't changed how we keep bees. And this is where the problem comes in with CCD, colony collapse disorder. So colony collapse disorder was just found about 6 years ago, 7 years ago, and it's a syndrome. It's not a disease, it's not a virus, it's not insects, it's not pesticides, it's not any one of these things. It's all of these things put together. If you want to boil the problem down, it boils down to one thing, and that's man. We are the problem. I'm the problem. You're the problem. We're the problem. We created the problem. This is a man-made problem. CCD. And what is CCD? Colony collapse disorder is when you go into your beehive, that's a perfectly healthy beehive. You have 30,000 bees in there, and you go in there today, and you say, "Hey girls, how you doing today?" And they respond, "Great, everything's good." And you go back a week later, you open up that lid, and you see about 10 to 100 bees. And you sit there and say, "What happened to this beehive?" Now, a lot of people thought it swarmed, and it left that box. Now you have to know a little bit about honeybees to understand what a swarm is. So swarming is when the queen bee leaves the hive along with half of the bees, half, that's an easy number, 6,000 to 15,000 bees, and she leaves that colony to go find a new place to live. And she'll set up home somewhere else, build a hive, and she leaves behind a queen cell and half the bees. That queen cell hatches, and it takes over that existing hive, so now you have two hives. Because the honeybee, we think of it as a super organism. We don't look at honeybees individually and say, ooh, isn't that a great organism? The organism is the entire hive. It's a super organism, and we call it a super organism because they can't survive individually. They need each other to survive. Not one bee can survive on its own when we're talking about honeybees. So, it's just like an amoeba. That single-celled organism, when it goes to reproduce, it just splits in half. And now you have two amoebas, right? Well, the same thing is happening to the honeybee hive. Reproduction of the honeybee is when that hive splits into two. So it swarms. A swarm isn't a bunch of bees going out looking for people to kill them. You know, the killer bee movie. It doesn't happen like that. A swarm of bees will leave the hive because you know what? It's the most docile time of their existence. They usually won't sting at all during this point in time. You'll have 10,000 bees and all of them are flying around you and not one of them will sting you because they have nothing to protect. They're not protecting their hive. They're looking for a new place to call home. So that's a swarm. So I've had boxes of bees where they'll swarm, the queen will leave, and she puts out a pheromone to say, hey, come on with me. And half of the bees are supposed to leave. Well, not only half of the bees leave, but 90% of the bees leave. Because everybody's saying, I don't want to stay with the new girl. I don't like her. Well, that queen took too many bees with her and didn't leave enough bees behind to sustain the hive that I had. And so it basically absconded. It just left and started a new hive somewhere else and didn't leave the ability for them to create a new queen and keep this hive in existence. So how can you tell the difference between a hive like that, where too many bees just left and they're out living somewhere else? They're just not living in this box, and I'm up here yelling, CCD, CCD, my bees are dying. Well, I can tell the difference because CCD, you have the queen bee left in your hive, and you have a handful of nurse bees left in the hive. Well, if that hive would have swarmed, the queen bee would have left along with the other bees. No, we're left with the queen bee inside the box with a few nurse bees that can't fly. What happened to the rest of the bees? We don't know. And that's where CCD came into existence. This syndrome of the queen's left behind and there's no bees to support that queen. So, they started looking into it. First thing that came out, everybody yell it, pesticides. Pesticides are killing the bees. Next thing, no, it's not the pesticides because, all those pesticide companies throw out the propaganda and say, we're not killing bees, we don't kill bees, we just kill the bad insects. So they said, no, it's viruses. No, it's the varroa mite. No, it's the hive beetle. No, it's this, it's that. Well, again, it's all those things. But if you want to boil it down to one thing, it's man that's doing it. And this is why man's doing it. We already talked about industrialized farming, right? High-density farming. Well, almonds are an example of industrialized farming. Has anybody been out to California to see almond orchards in California? It's beautiful. especially when they're in bloom. You go out there, it's just a sea of white flowers. Well, it's the size of the state of Delaware is nothing but almonds, almond trees, right? And literally there's nothing else except almond trees and dirt. They spray everything around to kill it with Roundup. So there's no weeds, there's no other trees, there's no other flowers. It's almonds and dirt for hundreds of miles in both directions. All right? Well, if you have almond trees and nothing else around, how many pollinators can live there? 0. Except for the 6-week period of time when those almond trees are in bloom. Because it's like a desert to butterflies and other insects because there's nothing to eat. There's no nectar, there's no pollen for the entire year except for the 6 weeks when those almonds are in bloom. So now you have no pollinators there all year long. And those things go into bloom, and from the outskirts, the edges, you would start getting natural pollinators pollinating the ones on the outside. Well, they never make it to the inside by the time the flowers drop off because there aren't enough. So we truck bees to the state of Florida every January. 80% of all the bees in the United States go to California to pollinate almonds. Isn't that crazy? The last 3 years, we haven't had enough bees in the United States to pollinate all the almonds in California. So we started flying bees from New Zealand and Australia to help pollinate almonds. All right? So who cares? Well, if you eat almonds, you care, because the price of almonds goes up if we don't have as many almonds. California is the #1 world producer of almonds. All right? So it's not just almonds, almond milk. How many people use almond milk instead of real milk because of lactose intolerance or something like that? So we're using a lot more almonds. How many people use almond flour because they don't want the glucose from wheat flour? So we're using more and more almonds. And the price of almonds has gone up over the last 3 years because we haven't had as many almonds, because we haven't had bees to pollinate all the almond trees. So we're trucking all the bees to California. So when you truck bees to California from Florida, you think you kill some bees? You definitely kill bees. The stress of moving them from Florida to California kills bees. So beekeepers are killing some bees, trucking them out there. The stress. Well, when they get out there, right? I take my bees to California from Florida. You're a beekeeper in Maine. You take your bees to California and you drop them off in the same orchard that my bees are in. Your bees are sick. My bees aren't. Guess what? My bees get sick because they're sitting right next to her bees. So it's like us jumping on an airplane, right? With all these sick people. Next thing you know, we're sick. Same thing. So we're placing the bees in unnatural situations because bees forage a 3 to 5 mile radius. So if my bees are flying a 3 to 5 mile radius here in Florida, do you think they're ever going to meet her bees in Maine? No, Maine's a little bit further away than 3 miles. And so my bees would have never gotten sick before because they would have never met because of that distance thing. Well, now man is artificially placing them in the same location, so we're spreading disease and virus like wildfire. So we're losing bees because we're trucking them, right? We're stressing them out. Then we're losing bees because now we're spreading disease and virus quickly. So when they're out there, yeah, they run into pesticides because we're placing them right in the middle of this field where the farmer just sprayed pesticides and fungicides. right? So we're placing them in harm's way, so bees die. So now we got 3 things that are killing bees right off the bat. So the beekeeper notices and says, wait a minute, I'm losing too many bees, I gotta replace my bees, right? So he's got let's say he has 1,000 hives and he just lost 300 hives in California. He's got to replace those 300 hives or he's going to eventually go out of business. So a new industry formed, and it was the industry of creating bees, mass producing queen bees. Right? Because if you have a queen bee, you have an entire beehive. At least a beekeeper does. Because I can buy a queen bee from somebody, and I can take frames of young bees out of my beehive. I can take 3 of these frames and put them in another box. And put that queen in with these bees in that other box, and now I have a whole new beehive. Because the queen is left in this box with young bees, and they're doing their thing in here. And the bees that I took out, it's called splitting the hive. So instead of that hive swarming on its own, man is artificially swarming that hive so he doesn't lose his bees. So he'll split that beehive in half and create 2 beehives. Then he'll create 4, 8, 16, 32. Can't do the math anymore. Did you get the idea? And so instead of him losing his bees to nature, he splits them before they swarm by adding a queen bee in with that. So now he has 2 hives. So an industry formed where I'll just stay at home, I'll create queen bees, and I'll supply all the beekeepers with queen bees so they can replenish the hives that are dying. Alright? So what does that mean? Well, you're going to have to know a little bit about the bee's biology to understand why this is a problem. So let's get into it. If you're shy and don't want to hear anything about the birds and the bees, you're excused right now. You can leave, but I will be talking about sex. So if you're offended, I apologize at this point in time. Now that I've warned everybody, we can move forward. So keep in mind, I got a guy leaving over here, so he doesn't want to hear about it. Alright, so the queen bee. The queen bee is inside the hive. Her only job is to lay eggs. She lays eggs all day long. She can lay 2,000 eggs a day. Every day of her life, lives 3 to 5 years. She'll create over 3 million eggs in her lifetime. Well, those eggs hatch into larvae. Those larvae then spin a cocoon, go through metamorphosis, pupate, they turn into a pupa, and then they turn into an adult bee and emerge out of that cell as an adult bee. So, the queen bee, we got to back up before she lays that egg, she had to mate. She only mates once in her life. And she leaves the hive as a virgin, and she flies out away from her hive. Okay? She'll fly further than the male bees fly from her hive. So she's not mating with brothers or sisters. Well, she's not mating with sisters, brothers. So she's flying far enough away where she's getting into an area where there's strange boy bees. They're called drone bees. And so a drone bee will come up in flight. He has hooks in her, puts hooks in her, spreads her apart, inseminates her. Well, those hooks don't come out. He flies away, rips out his genitals. Right? What a wonderful life a male bee has. So he ends up bleeding to death. The next drone bee comes in. He's got to remove those genitals before he can mate with her. Alright? So you would think the big brain is saying, hey, this ain't a good idea. Then the little brain takes over and says, I'm going to do it anyways. Alright? So she'll do this 15 to 20 times on that maiden flight. We know we can call her, but we won't, right? So she's inseminated with semen, and she holds that semen in a special sac in her body, and she comes back to the hive, and she never has to do it again. I won't say anything about my wife at this point in time. So, she's inseminated, she's back at the hive, and she goes to lay an egg. And she decides if she wants a female bee or a male bee at that point in time. And she says, well, I want a female bee. So she releases an egg and she releases semen at the same time, and she fertilizes that egg, and it becomes a female bee. Pretty cool, huh? If she just lays an egg and releases no semen, it's going to be a male bee. So an unfertilized egg turns into a male bee, a fertilized egg turns into a female bee. All right? And she controls the number of boys and girls in the hive. And so, if they want to make a queen bee, let's say the queen dies, and they have eggs and larvae inside the hive. The worker bees can still survive because they can make a new queen bee. Because the only difference between a queen bee and a worker bee is basically the length of time and what they feed the larva. So, I'm going to keep it real simple. So let's say the egg hatches into a larva. The nurse bees will feed that larva for 3 days. Then stop feeding it. The lack of nutrition doesn't allow the ovaries to fully develop, and the bee is stunted in growth, so it's smaller. So it becomes a female worker bee because the ovaries aren't fully developed. She can't lay eggs. And so, if they want to make a queen bee, all they have to do is feed a larva for more than 3 days. They'll feed it for 10 days, and what they feed it is a richer, more nutrient-rich substance, which is called royal jelly. And it turns into a queen bee just because that larva got full nutrition from beginning to end, 10-day period of time. So it grew to full size. So now that bee is twice the size of all the other bees because it got full nutrition, and the ovaries fully developed. And now it's a virgin queen bee. That bee will hatch between day 10 and day 15. It's a full-grown queen bee. Whereas the other worker bees, it takes 22 days because of the lack of nutrition. And it develops slower, and it develops smaller, and those ovaries don't fully develop. Then, that virgin queen can go out, mess around, and come back. And now she's ready to lay eggs inside the hive. So, we can, as man, we figured out we can manipulate this. We can take the queen bee out of this beehive, and they will produce queen cells. And they won't just produce one. They'll produce 15, 20 queen cells inside that hive. The first one to hatch, first queen that hatches, runs around and looks for all the other queen cells. She'll chew into the side of those queen cells and sting the queen inside before it even hatches, so she's the only one left in the hive. Now, if more than one hatches at the same time, they'll fight to the death. And only the strongest will survive. So then you're getting nice, strong bees. Right? Or, one queen says, I'm not fighting, I'm getting out of here. And takes off and swarms with some of the other bees. And so now you're getting a splitting of the hive during that hatching period. So that swarming process. So man figured out, hey, I can make them make queen cells if I just take the queen out of there. Right? And I can go a step further, and instead of them just choosing the larvae that they want to turn into queens, we can pick out larvae and put them in a special little plastic man-made queen cell and hang them in the hive, and they'll turn every one of them into a queen. All right, so now you have 45 queen cells hanging inside this queenless hive. And the beekeeper waits until day 10. At day 10, the bottom of that gets capped over. And then he can take each one of those queen cells and put them in individual starter hives that don't have queens. That queen will hatch, goes out, mates, comes back, takes over that little starter hive. Then he can grab that queen out, package her up, and send her away to other beekeepers. Right? But he doesn't do it 1, 2 at a time, 3 at a time. No, he does it thousands of times, tens of thousands of times. All right? Now remember, you have a queen laying an egg inside a hive. Right? She lays 2,000 eggs a day. They're all her offspring. Right? So now a beekeeper, over time, he splits his own hives. Okay? So he takes and splits this hive. And they're making a queen from the eggs and larvae out of this hive. So they are sister queens, right? Then he splits those 2 hives to make 4 hives, and now there's 4 sister queens, because they're coming from the same offspring of that original queen. And so, when that beekeeper turns into a queen breeder, he's actually breeding all sister queens. So they're sending out tens of thousands of sister queens across the United States to beekeepers, right? So now we say, all right, we got 2 beekeepers living 3 miles apart. All right, and we both order queen bees from the same breeder. So now we have sister queens in our bee yards that are 3 miles apart. All right? Well, then I go to split some of my hives naturally, because that's what I do. I'm a beekeeper. I want to keep manipulating and making more hives. Well, now my virgin queens are going out to mate on their own, and they're flying out of the area of my beehives into the area of this other beekeeper, hoping to mate with bees that have different genetics because she's flying out of her area. Well, guess what? She's mating with brothers from a sister, brothers from another mother. Yeah. So now we shrunk the gene pool within the United States because of this industrialized queen breeding. Now we had to do it because we were losing all our bees. We needed to produce bees quickly. So we did it. Was it the right thing to do? We could debate it all day long. But we've now shrunk the gene pool in the United States. So what happens when you have a really low gene pool? You get some funky bees. You know? Did you ever visit some of those states up in the mountains? Yeah. No offense to anybody from the mountains. So, or England, you know, it's an island. So that gene pool gets shrunk, and we start making funky bees. And they don't know how to pollinate, they don't know how to make honey, they don't know how to do all these things. And so that's bad. We start losing bees because of genetics. We also start losing bees because if you have a low gene pool, you have a low tolerance to disease, virus, and adaptation to change in the environment or whatever. So we start losing more bees because of a low gene pool. So now we have trucking bees, we have industrialized farming because of the placement of bees, we have insecticides that are killing bees, and now we have low gene pool killing bees. So man recognized that we had a low gene pool, so what did we do? We said, well, let's just increase the gene pool. We'll bring bees in from another country to increase our gene pool, right? Sounds like a simple solution. Well, we brought bees in from New Zealand and Australia. And they look like healthy bees. You know, they're acting like bees, no problems, right? One thing we didn't recognize was those bees had always grown up around a virus called the acute Israeli virus. So it was like a common cold to them because they developed a resistance to that. Well, we bring them into the United States thinking they're healthy bees, and our bees start commingling with those bees because we sticking them in the same location because of the farming that we're doing. And what happens? It's like a white man coming to the United States for the first time. We wiped out all the Indians because of smallpox and all those diseases, right? Well, the same thing, we started wiping out honeybees because viruses started running rampant. The acute Israeli virus starts running rampant because of the way that man is keeping bees. So instead of increasing the gene pool, what do we have to do? We had to produce more bees to replace the ones that were leaving because of the acute Israeli virus. Woo! What's man doing, right? We're not done yet. So, we lose bees because of trucking, we lose bees because of placement, because of high-density farming, we lose bees because of pesticides, we lose bees because of genetics, and we lose bees because of stupidity. And so, then man decides, we need to genetically modify plants. GMOs, right? Genetically modified plants. 80% of the corn in the United States is genetically modified. Isn't that wonderful? We've genetically modified 80% of the corn that we grow. Don't worry about it. It's not going to hurt anybody, right? Corn is a wind pollinator. Did you know that? How many people knew that wind pollinated corn? Yeah? Not the honeybee. Honeybees do not pollinate corn. Well, if you take a human and stick them on a cruise ship, and they have a buffet on that cruise ship, do you think that human is going to feed at that buffet? Yes. Because it's there. It's food. They just keep giving me food. I'm going to eat it. Well, if you place bees next to a cornfield, bees eat two things, people: nectar and pollen. Well, corn doesn't give nectar, but the hell with it. Look at all the pollen. I'm going to gorge. So bees started going to corn to grab the pollen. They're not pollinating anything. They're going for the free lunch. Guess what? Gives them intestinal cancer. Yeah. Pollen from genetically modified corn gives them intestinal cancer. Now this is on tape. Somebody's probably going to come back to me and say, our corn isn't giving them intestinal cancer. Show me the data. Google it. Google it right now. Google knows everything. Me standing up here, I can't prove that it gives them intestinal cancer. Other studies have showed it gives them intestinal cancer. Okay? So that's my caveat. So, bees are dying because of genetically modified crops that man is creating. Did you know that it is not good to eat pollen from genetically modified plants? Did you know that the only time honey was banned for human consumption is when it contained genetically modified pollen? Oh yeah, we know. Yeah, but just don't eat it. This honey's no good. You know, just put it off to the side. You never hear about that, do you? In Germany, bees got into genetically modified crops. Pollen ends up in the honey. Believe it or not, pollen ends up in honey. And they actually banned the consumption of honey in Germany because of pollen inside the honey that was genetically modified. Scary stuff. Scary. Do you know what you're eating? No. We just go to Publix, grab it. Yep, looks good. Did you know systemic pesticides? Yeah, I know you're going to be all over me again. Systemic pesticides. Systemic pesticides are the wonder pesticide. Because how do we apply pesticides? Airplanes? Spray the whole crop. Tractors? Spray it. Well, you need airplanes, you need tractors, and people. Costs money, right? Neonicotinoid pesticides? You just coat the seed. Throw it in the ground. When it germinates, it's inside the plant. You never have to spray the crops. Isn't that cool? Pesticides built right in. But it's not selective. Any insect that goes to that plant, it's going to get that neonicotinoid pesticide. Because that neonicotinoid is inside the plant, it's going to every parts of the plant. It's going to the nectar, it's going to the pollen, it's going to the leaves. So if something chews on the leaves, it's going to die. Something drinks the nectar, it's going to die. Well, what drinks nectar? Honeybees, right? They're getting neonicotinoid pesticides. Now, from the research that I've done, and my understanding, not that it's true, my understanding, please note my understanding, is that neonicotinoid pesticides give bees dementia, and they can't find their way back to the beehive. Okay? Well, remember that thing we were talking about in the beginning, called CCD? Where you have a queen left, and a few young bees? Where are all the other bees? They're flying around out there still trying to find home. Because they have dementia. Well, the pesticide companies come in, and they say, neonicotinoids didn't kill this beehive, I see no dead bees. Right? Because before, if I would go to my beehive, and there'd be 2 inches of dead bees on the bottom, I'd say, damn, my bees got into pesticides. Right? They're all dead. They're laying right at the bottom. Because they grab the pesticide, bring it back to the beehive, feed it to the other bees, and then all die. Right? Neonicotinoids don't work that way. Bees go out, nibble on it. Woo! What bus was I supposed to get on to get back home? Right? They never make it back to make that pile of bees to show the pesticide companies, look, damn neonicotinoids are killing the bees. And you know, beekeepers, they don't have a strong network. So they don't all band together and put lots of money in people's pockets and say, hey, you know, let's get rid of these neonicotinoid pesticides. Right? But lobbyists keep neonicotinoid pesticides out in the market. So it's very hard, especially in the United States, to get things banned. In Europe, neonicotinoid pesticides have been banned for 3 years. They just banned neonicotinoid pesticides in England not too long ago. And guess what? Bayer is suing England for banning neonicotinoid pesticides. Because there's no hard evidence that these things are killing bees. Right? So we need to work on neonicotinoid pesticides. Because there's an indication that there might be something funky going on with neonicotinoid pesticides. Do your own research. So neonicotinoid pesticides are a problem to honeybees, along with all these other things. So, what's the real problem with honeybees? Right? That's where I came into existence. Because I teach usually little kids about the importance of the honeybee, and you should become a beekeeper. Why should I become a beekeeper? It's hot out there in the field. I got to work with these ugly little insects. I don't make a lot of money. I got to lift heavy things. I get dirty and sweaty. Because if you don't become a beekeeper, you're not going to eat. We can have all the doctors and all the attorneys and all the computer programmers in the world. If you can't feed them, they're not worth much. Right? We need farmers, people, and we need beekeepers. Did you know we have 50% less beekeepers in the United States than we did 30 years ago? Guess what? We have 50% less bees in the United States than we did 30 years ago. Is there a correlation here? Number of beekeepers, number of bees. Yes. Because when a beekeeper goes out of business, he is not selling his 1,000 beehives to another beekeeper, and now that beekeeper's keeping 2,000 hives. No, doesn't happen that way. When a beekeeper goes out of business and he sells his beehives, who's buying them? Is a beekeeper that just lost 1,000 beehives and he needs to replace his 1,000 beehives. And so the number's not going up. It's just replacing the bees that the other beekeeper died off. So it's getting smaller and smaller. Now, there has been a resurgence of beekeepers in the United States in the last couple of years because of CCD. If you call up the state of Florida and say, how many new beekeepers are there in the last 2 years? They're going to say something like, we have an extra 1,639 beekeepers, brand new beekeepers. Isn't that great? Hurrah, we're getting more beekeepers. You know what? They're all hobbyist beekeepers. They're keeping them in their backyard. How many people have commercial farms in their backyard? Raise your hand if you have a commercial farm in your backyard. Not one. So those bees forage how far? 3 to 5 miles. How many people have a commercial farm within 3 to 5 miles of their house? No one? What do you guys live in a city? Right? So those bees are doing nothing for commercial food production. Yet, the state's sitting there saying, yay, we have a lot more beekeepers. And it is, it's wonderful. On an education level, an awareness level. I will advocate for anybody to become a backyard beekeeper all day long, and I'll be the cheerleader. I'm the #1 cheerleader. Bee Understanding has given away almost 500 beehives, free of charge, to beginner beekeepers, backyard beekeepers, to learn about the honeybee and the importance that the honeybee does. Because if you don't raise bees, you haven't a clue what's going on with the bees. And it's the most fascinating thing that you'll ever do. And you don't have to raise 1,000 hives. Just raise one. Give them a place to live in your backyard. Because everybody's freaking out. They're saying, I don't want bees in my backyard. They're killer bees. They're going to come over. They're going to swarm me. My neighbor has bees, and they're going to swarm me, and they're going to kill me. I know it. They do it. Right? You laugh. People were freaking out about people becoming backyard beekeepers because of Africanized bees. They're going to swarm me and kill me. Get rid of them. City of Boca Raton runs out there. You got bees. You can't do that. They're going to swarm and kill your neighbor. You got to get rid of those things. Oh, you're not going to get rid of them? You're saving the world? I'm going to fine you. I'm going to fine you every day that you don't get rid of that beehive. Thousands of dollars. I better get rid of the damn bees because I can't afford to live here. Right? Now, how sensible is that? Not very sensible. That's humans for you. Right? So, what did beekeepers do? We actually did something good, I think. Because we went and we lobbied. Yes, beekeepers lobbied. There were 4 of us. Went to the state of Florida and said, look, you're looking at this totally wrong. And they said, why? We don't want to kill people with Africanized bees. And we said, but you are. When you let cities and municipalities ban backyard beekeeping, you're actually supporting the Africanized honeybee. Yes, we have Africanized honeybees in the state of Florida. Killer bees in the state of Florida. Right? The state says 80% of feral hives in the state of Florida are Africanized. Alright. You like all these little divergences here? So, now I gotta teach you Because everybody freaks out. If it's a wild beehive, it's Africanized. But you're smart now because I taught you about queen bees. You know that that queen bee left once in her life to go and mate. And she mated with how many drone bees? 15 to 20. If she mates with 14 European bees and one Africanized bee, she went on the wrong side of the tracks. And she comes back to that beehive and she starts laying eggs, 2,000 a day, right? She's the one putting the semen with the egg to fertilize it, right? Again, we'll keep it easy because the numbers don't actually work out like this. But let's say that 1 out of 14 of her offspring are Africanized. Because, 15 bees, 1 was Africanized that gave her semen, the rest were all European. Chances are she's going to lay more eggs that are fertilized with European semen than Africanized semen. So the majority of the bees in that beehive are going to be European rather than Africanized. But there are Africanized genes in that hive. So the state is correct when 80% of feral bees are Africanized. Not every bee in that beehive is Africanized, but there are some, yes. So I deal with Africanized bees every day, according to the state. And I've yet to have one swarm and kill me. It's crazy. And I find that most of the hives work just like European honeybees. I go around and I do full removals. I don't advocate this, but I do full removals with no jacket, veil, gloves. No, bees don't bother me. Now you have to understand bees before you go and try to do something like that because you have to know when, where, and how. Don't just go do this. But yes, I will do removals not wearing a suit. Yet I'm dealing with Africanized honeybees. And so, back to that Boca story, right? Because now we're educated. And so, if you don't allow a beekeeper in Boca Raton. Now, Boca Raton, like Wellington and a lot of these other communities, they love to plant flowers, right? We love a beautiful community. And we go to extremes. We'll plant pretty flowers that are in bloom. Then as soon as they're not blooming, we'll rip them out and plant pretty flowers. Rip them out, plant pretty flowers. And so there's always something in bloom, right? Well, if there's always something in bloom, what is sitting in your yard? A cruise ship with a buffet. And something's going to come and feed from that buffet. Because we learned that you put humans next to a buffet and they will feed on it. If you put bees next to a buffet, they will feed on it. So now Boca Raton is a buffet. Something's going to come and utilize that buffet. Who's going to utilize it? Feral bees. Because there's no European bees in the neighborhood. So what moves in? Plenty of food here, let's move to Boca. So feral bees move to Boca. Well, what's a feral bee? It's Africanized, right? This is how we can lobby this one. So we tell everybody, hey, you're inviting Africanized bees to Boca because you don't have European bees. They're eating the food to create competition for that food. And so, Africanized bees, you're actually inviting them to the buffet. So, if you want to keep Africanized bees out of your area, you need European bees and beekeepers to forage on that food, to create competition, to keep feral bees from wanting to move into that area because there's not enough food. Right? Makes sense? And so, if you have a European beekeeper in that community, his bees are traveling 3 to 5 miles, eating up that food, creating competition, so it makes it harder for feral bees to move into that area. If a feral beehive does move into that area, and there's no European bees there, it's all feral bees. And it goes to requeen, and that queen goes out to mate. Who's she going to mate with? Africanized bees, because the only thing in the area are Africanized feral bees. So instead of her mating with one Africanized bee and 14 European bees, she's mating with 14 Africanized bees and 1 European bee. So how mean is that hive going to be? It's going to be more aggressive, because the difference between an Africanized bee and a European honeybee is the aggression level to protect their hive. They call them killer bees because a European hive will send out a very small, limited number of bees to protect its hive. Let's say 30 to 200. Okay? And those bees will chase me about 50 yards from the beehive. Then they give up. They say, they go back to the beehive. Right? An Africanized hive, fully Africanized, not 1 per 14, fully Africanized hive, will send out 1,000, 2,000 bees to protect that hive. And you can run, they'll chase you for a mile. Not 50 yards, a mile. And they'll still be chasing you to protect their hive. Okay? So it takes 1,000 bee stings to kill a man my size. Now, if a European hive is only sending out 100 bees to protect it, is that hive killing me? No. If I'm working with an Africanized hive, they send out enough bees to possibly put enough venom in me to kill me. That's how they got the name killer bee, because they actually send out enough bees in mass to kill a human. Do they do that? Sure, if it's fully Africanized. Do they do that in Boca Raton? Very seldom, if at all, because it's a blend. It's European and Africanized honeybees. So if you have a blended hive, instead of sending out 100 bees to protect it, or 1,000 bees to protect it, it's somewhere in between. It might send out 500 bees to protect that hive. Well, is that enough to kill you? No. It's more aggressive than the European, but less aggressive than the Africanized. So, back to that feral beehive, if she's around European bees and she's mating with European bees, it's going to dilute down the number of aggressive bees in that hive. And so it's beneficial to have beekeepers in your community because, number one, they're niche pollinators. They're pollinating the orange trees, the lemon trees, the lime trees, the backyard vegetable gardens, wildflowers, grasses, all those things. They're niche pollinators. Pollinating that 3 to 5 mile radius around you. And they're also keeping the bee population under control in your area. So beekeepers are friendly, so we convinced the state that we need people to keep bees in these communities to help protect against the Africanized bee. And so we actually got a law that was written in with the Right to Farm Act, which says that everyone has the right to keep bees in their own backyard. Hey, one for humans. We're talking about. So we can all become backyard beekeepers, and it's a great thing to become a backyard beekeeper. It's a lot of fun, and you learn a lot about communities. Because could you imagine having 30,000 sisters? How many people would get along? Not very many. In the beehive, they can't survive without getting along. And it's fascinating to get inside and see the inner workings of a beehive. And once you get comfortable around those bees are comfortable around you. I call it my yoga moment, right? My yoga moment, because I've taken students out to collect feral bees, and I'm not wearing anything, and they're suited up, and they're like, how can you do that? And I'm like, it's a yoga moment. You get in the right spot, right frame of mind, and you become one of them. They won't bother you. I'm going to do it. I'm ready. They take their veil off. They're the only one getting stung. You know? And it's because you release pheromones, smells of fear. They understand that fear, and they sit there and say, I'm a half-inch long. Watch me mess with this 6 foot, 175 guy, and he's going to be running like a little girl. This is so much fun. And he starts chasing them, and that guy just running across the yard. Right? So, they can sense fear, even if you don't think you have a fear in the world of getting stung by bees. Deep down, if you're fearful of bees, you're going to get stung. If you're swatting bees, you're going to get stung. And it's funny, but if you are calm around bees, and you're in that yoga moment, you're there. Very seldom will you get stung by bees. And it is the most fascinating thing that I've done around bees. And when I first began, I was like, how do they do that? How do they do it? And I'd ask every expert. You know, they'd be out there with flip-flops, shorts, t-shirt. Oh yeah, you want to go in this hive? Yeah, sure, here you go. Uh-huh. You know, there it is. I'm getting stung, and they're like, yeah, what's wrong? You know, and I'm like, how do you do that? They're like, I don't know. One day it just comes. And I'm like, there's got to be a secret. It's got to be a secret. And you know what? I never figured out how it was done. Just one day, next thing you know, I'm not getting stung. And it just happens that way. You work with bees long enough, I don't know if you get the smell on you, I don't know if you just, you know, whatever it is, but you finally get to that yoga moment, and most of them won't bother you. Most of them. The wildest thing I've had an experience with bees, removing a feral beehive. And you're always a little bit apprehensive because you know that these are strange bees. And did you know that bees can recognize people's faces? They can recognize people's faces, and they can recognize smells of people. And so, I've met people that have sprayed to try to get rid of beehives. For months, they'd come out and spray and not kill it. And the bees started recognizing these people, saying, hey, this is the guy that sprays that shit all over our hive, you know. Well, let's get him before he gets anywhere near the hive, right? 30, 40 feet before he even gets to the hive, he's getting stung, right? Guy calls me up and says, hey, I got Africanized honeybees in my house, you know. When you come over, you got to put your suit on because, you know, you get out of the truck, they'll be stinging you, right? Get out of the truck, walk over to the beehive. I'm like, oh, yeah, look, yeah, she's cute. You know, wow, that's crazy. I'm like, they're not stinging me. He's hiding in the screened-in porch, you know. And I'm like, come on out. And he's like, oh, my God, anywhere near them. They sting me. You know, and it's like, what were you do, spraying them? Yeah, I've been spraying them for a month. Yeah, no wonder. Yeah, so they recognize. So the best thing that ever happened to me, I'm doing a feral bee removal, and you have a bee that comes up to you and is hovering, and is eye to eye with you, and just looking right at you. And you know this thing to just turn around and say, I'm stinging them. And then it'll run, you know. But no, it just sits there. And I think of if a spaceship landed right here today and 6 little green men jumped out and walked over to me, I'd be like, what is it? And that's what it is for the bees. You know, they're coming over saying, what are you? You know, are you going to treat us right? Are you going to kill us? What are you doing? And I swear I'm sending out some kind of message. No, I'm here to protect you. I'm the bee advocate. Did you hear? I'm Al the bee guy. You know, that's why I wear the shirt. It's not for you guys, it's for the bees. See, I'm here to help you guys. Don't sting me. It's the weirdest thing. It feels like they're sucking something out of my brain. And it just fascinates me to no end that I can mess with 30,000, 60,000. I've done hives that are over 100,000 bees in one hive with no veil. crazy. Over 15 pounds of bees. All right? And we're talking little bees this big, don't weigh much. 15 pounds of bees, right? It is the craziest, wildest thing. I used to be in the restaurant business. I told you I was in the restaurant business to begin with. Then I switched over and became a beekeeper. And this has been the most fascinating thing that I've ever done in my life. And it's changed my life for the better. Because now I understand, from understanding the honeybee, I understand the world around us. And it was a lesson that I had to learn, obviously, a life lesson, that I needed to be a protector of the earth, or somebody who understands what's happening. And I do understand that we need pesticides to feed humans. Because did you ever try to grow a tomato plant? You grow one tomato plant, you're going to be fine, you're going to get tomatoes. You put 50 tomato plants out there because that one tomato plant did so well, and next thing you know, you go out the next morning and say, what happened to my tomato plants? Because you placed all those tomato plants in one area, and now there was enough food there for those little caterpillars to come in and say, chow down. And so, do I recognize that we need pesticides to farm food for humans? Yes. We can never go back to the point where everything is totally organic. Is organic an option? Sure it is. In smaller amounts. But we're not going to feed the world by doing organic. So I understand the honeybee side. I also understand the human side. And there's got to be some place in the middle where we both meet. And that's what we haven't found out. We haven't found that place in the middle where we can all sustain and live this perfect utopian life. And so what we need to work on, everybody says, what can I do to help? You're helping today because you're taking the first step to understanding the relationship between man and nature. And that's why we have Earth Day. If you got nothing else out of this but a little bit of humor from queen bees going out and messing around, leave here today thinking, you know what? That apple might not be there tomorrow. That almond might not be there tomorrow. And we might actually get back to the point, I don't know if you ever watched one of those black and white movies where at Christmas time, they look in their stocking and they find an orange. And they're tickled pink with an orange. Oh, wow, an orange. Or a tangerine. Because they didn't have oranges or tangerines all year round. You couldn't just go to the store and get an orange and, all year round. So the point in time is going to come when you walk into a grocery store and you won't be able to pick up an apple or an orange because it's not being pollinated. And so if you want to YouTube something, this is a YouTube generation. YouTube pears, I think it's China. Pears in China and pollinating pears in China. They are self-pollinating pears in China because they don't have pollinators any longer to do it for them. So these are sacred trees. They come out when they're in bloom. First they have to collect pollen, put it in little envelopes, then they pass it around to all the different farmers, then they take and put feathers into the pollen, and they climb up in the trees and they're pollinating all the flowers by hand. The entire village comes out to pollinate the pears. So to get a glimpse of how well man does at pollination, take a look at that video. Imagine trying to pollinate enough alfalfa to feed the cattle that gives you one bowl of ice cream. Right? We ain't doing it. I'd rather become a beekeeper first. Right? And so there are a lot of crazy things out there happening, and man thinks that, well, we can just change the almond tree so it becomes a self-pollinator. What do you mean? You're going to genetically modify the almond tree so it pollinates itself? What are we playing now? Let's let the bees do it. So, that's the end. We can sit here all day long and talk. If anybody has any questions, we can fire away now, and I'll try to answer. Any questions? Any comments?
Will they bite dogs?
Will they bite dogs? How many people in here have been bit by a bee? Raise your hand if you've been bit by a bee. Well, I'm here to tell you that you've never been bit by a bee. Bees don't bite. This is what I teach in elementary school, so we're going back a little bit further, but I will step back there. Bees don't bite. They don't use their mouth to bite, they sting. They have a stinger on their bottom and they use it to protect their hive. How many people in here have been stung by a mosquito? No, you've never been stung by a mosquito. Mosquitoes bite, bees sting. Mosquitoes bite with their mouth to suck blood out of you to eat it as food. Bees sting to protect their hive. Mosquitoes do not have a stinger to protect their hive. Sorry, I'm not going to treat everybody the same way, so nobody's going to ask a question. So do they bite dogs? Do they sting dogs? They will sting anything that is bothering their hive. And so where we run into problems is when there's a beehive close to the ground, in a water meter box, and a lawnmower runs over it, creates a lot of noise and vibration. Bees come out, they start looking for something to sting, and they will sting anything that's around that vicinity. Dogs, cats, people, horses. So placing bees in the right location is critical. They are not discriminatory on what they will sting. I've seen where they kill chickens. Chickens would do a dirt bath right in front of the beehive. Not a good idea. Throwing dirt inside the beehive, bees come out, sting the chicken. They don't quite weigh 175 pounds and don't stand 6 feet tall, so it doesn't take 1,000 bees to kill a chicken. So I've seen chickens die from bee stings. They will sting anything. They like things that are dark in color, so dogs that are black in color would be more likely to be stung than a tan dog. And it goes right back to that bear thing. They just don't like the color black. You wave black in front of their hive and they'll be all over it. Hence, that's why beekeepers wear white. But they will sting just about anything to protect their hive. If you see a bee out on a flower, that bee does not want to sting you because it's away from its hive, it's not protecting its young. Now it will sting you if it feels threatened. If you start swatting at it or trying to do something to it, it would sting you to protect itself, but yet it's going to die because honeybees, they have fishhook barbs on their stinger. Once it goes in you and it flies away, you can actually look and see the venom gland and it'll still be pumping like a heart. So it's an adaptation because when you get stung, you're going to kill it, right? Well, or flick it away. So the honeybee, it was wants to keep the stinger there, yet leave, and that venom is still being pumped inside you to get the maximum amount of venom in you before the insect dies. And so, if you threaten that bee, it will sting you, but it will die, which is a weird thing. The queen bee is the only bee that can sting more than once in the honeybee world because it doesn't have that fishhook barb on its stinger. It's a needle-like stinger, and it will only use its stinger to sting other queen bees. Very rarely will they sting humans. You can hold the queen bee in your hand, pick her up, she's not going to sting you because she's using her stinger not for protecting the hive, but she's using it to kill other queen bees. So yeah, they're not discriminatory. They'll sting anything that's around that they think is a threat to their hive. Do you ever notice that bees love to fly around your head?
Yeah.
Yeah? And that's because of carbon dioxide. They hate carbon dioxide, and it goes back to that bear thing, where bears have long hair all over them, and they can't sting bears, on their hair to scare them away. And so no hair in the nose and mouth. So bees will follow the carbon dioxide trail back to the nose and mouth or around the eyes to sting to get the best effect of getting whatever away from the hive. So if you have a bee flying around your head, you're going to stand up and go, ah! It's the last thing you want to do. You want to just hold your breath, slowly walk away, and that bee really won't follow you, especially if you walk close to a bush or a tree, because bees have bad eyesight, and they see on a different spectrum. They see on an ultraviolet spectrum. So they work on movement. So if you're flailing, they know that you're the thing that they're looking for, because everything else is pretty much still. And those different lenses that are in their eyes, if movement goes from one eye to the next, they recognize that movement. So you become a tree, you become a bush, they don't see the color red, it's black to them because of that ultraviolet spectrum. Any other questions?
Black is in the black they go after.
You know, it's a weird thing, because I've been taught, don't wear black as a beekeeper, don't wear black. I'll wear black pants and a black shirt, and I'm fine. It's in your movements, and different varying colors. So if I'm in black, I'm in all black, not black with a white dot on it, because they'll respond differently to that black than just a solid black. So it's for the most part, they don't like the color black. So, question?
Yeah, so from my part, it seems that our food industry is sustainable on many layers of bees. So what's something that we can kind of do as a consumer to lessen the impact in that you not buy honey so that they don't ship these bees everywhere or something? Or should you buy them local? Or what do you suggest a consumer can do?
Well, on that level, the only thing you can do is just not eat. But that's not going to happen. I describe it as the fish bowl, right? You come home from the fair because you threw a ping pong ball into the fish bowl and you won that goldfish, and you bring it home and you're like, this is the best pet ever. I don't have to do much, throw a little bit of food in there, change the water. I'm going to get 50 more goldfish as pets. And you throw 50 more goldfish in that bowl, and next thing you know, they're all dead because that fish bowl couldn't sustain 50, it could sustain 1. Well, the world is our big fish bowl. How many humans is it going to take before the fish bowl is full? And so we cure cancer, we live longer lives, we cure diseases, even wars nowadays. We're not killing nearly as many people as we did before. So we keep increasing the number of people in the world. Every day, it's astronomical, the number of people that we're increasing by, which is impacting the land, because we need more place to keep the humans. Yet we need more land to create more food to sustain the people, right? So the system appears to be a little bit backwards, that we're getting more humans and less space to grow food. So in a roundabout way, I'm telling you that it's going to be really hard to have an impact on that system by just changing, not buying honey or not eating this food, or because it's industrialized, or picketing because of monocropping. We're doing monocropping for a reason. We didn't sit there and say, let's monocrop. We have to monocrop, and we have to do these things for a reason. Feed the world, right? And so we're doing that short-term solution because there really isn't another choice. And what I'm here to do is to stimulate you and other people into thinking outside the box. How can we build a sustainable system? And not one person is going to do that. It's going to be this little tweak and change, and then 10 years later, we advance from this little step to this next step, and it all works together. It's from pesticides You know, if you want to do something, become a scientist to develop a pesticide that doesn't affect honeybees, that only affects targeted insects, you know, and target insects. Once we start understanding that everything is interrelated and everything is very complex, man likes to think singularly, where, like in that genetic problem, we'll just bring genetics in, you know, and it made the problem worse. We have to think in complexities, like nature is, to work with nature. One of the things that I think is going to happen in the bee industry, we talked about Africanized bees a little bit, and we talked about European bees. Well, what we've started to notice is that Africanized bees aren't susceptible to the stresses that European bees are. So we're not seeing colony collapse disorder in the Africanized bee. Africanized bees are dealing with viruses that come into the United States without problem. We have Africanized bees that are dealing with varroa mite and different pests in the hive. And one has to sit there and say, why is the Africanized bee able to sustain itself and actually increase in size when the European honeybee isn't able to sustain itself and it's shrinking in size? Well, it goes back to that genetics thing. Man, over time, has been genetically altering the honeybee even when we didn't know anything about genetics. Because thousands of years ago, they would go out to a beehive in a tree, and they would get stung up and couldn't get anywhere near that tree. This tree, the bees weren't too bad. So somebody said, I'm going to raise these honeybees. You know, so they took those honeybees because they didn't sting as much and started raising bees off of those bees. And so we started genetically modifying by only selecting the bees that were less aggressive and produced more honey, right? So thousands of years we've narrowed the gene pool down to bees that are less aggressive and make more honey. Well, we left the more aggressive bees because who wants to raise an aggressive bee? We don't mess with it, right? So hence the Africanized bee, we didn't mess with it for hundreds of years. So what's happened to the Africanized honeybees? The genetics have gone in a different direction than the genetics of the human bee or the European honeybee, where they have diversity, our bees don't have diversity. So the Africanized honeybee is able to sustain itself because it can adapt to the changing situations where our man-made bee are genetically modified, and I say that not by, you know, this mad scientist, you know, going in there and changing genes, but by selection of genes, selecting bees that we've altered. And so there will come a point in time where we will be raising Africanized honeybees because we need to go back to square one and start over. And we'll find Africanized bees that are less aggressive, and we'll start raising bees off of those less aggressive bees. And it'll take hundreds of years before we're right back in the same position that we are today, because man doesn't learn. We just make the same mistakes over and over and over again. You know, it's this big cycle. So, question?
What about breeding, beekeepers specifically breeding European to Africanized to try and increase the genetic diversity against, like, being able to be killed by the diseases and things like that, the Europeans are the
And that's what I feel is going to happen, because we're already seeing it happening in nature in Florida, because the Africanized bees are mating with our European honeybees. You cannot tell the difference between a Africanized bee and a European bee except by DNA or by closely looking at the wing, the veining in the wings. But somebody looking at a bee, you can't sit there and say, look, this one's Africanized, and this one's European, this one's German, this one's Italian. You know, you can't. So if you have a feral beehive in your yard and you call a pest control company, they're going to sensationalize and say, hey, this is an Africanized honeybee, hive. It's dangerous. You gotta give me lots of money and I'll spray it, Well, the reason they can say that is because the state says that 80% of the feral hives are Africanization to them, yet people don't understand that the level of Africanization. So, South America, that's all they're raising are Africanized bees. So we are able to work with Africanized bees. It's when they're in, communities that it becomes an issue, because they will protect that hive, So, questions? Answers? There are no answers yet. So thank you for your time. If anybody wants to come up and see my observation hive, this